This past Saturday at approximately 12:15, we received a call to conduct a well-being check there on Garrett Road in Ridgeway. Our deputies responded shortly thereafter. Upon arrival at the home, they made contact with a 17-year-old male juvenile who had stated he had just found his mother in a state of distress and that she needed help. Our deputies immediately went inside. What we determined was that individual was in fact deceased at that time. Through the course of the investigation, this investigative team worked diligently, day in and day out, to bring justice to this family for this tragic incident. So what we determined is that the individual, Miss Rhonda Hairston-Lockett, was in fact deceased from a single gunshot wound. Through the course of that investigation, they spent Saturday and Sunday collecting physical evidence, forensic evidence, and conducting witness interviews. As a result of that, we determined that Joseph Chad Lockett was responsible for her death. At such time, we charged him with first-degree murder. We currently have an outstanding first-degree murder warrant on him. We are looking for his whereabouts, so anyone who may know where he's at, please contact 911.
The sheriff's office now naming Joseph Lockett as a suspect in the deadly shooting of Rhonda Lockett.
Now, Joseph is her estranged husband.
Now, the sheriff's office says Joseph Lockett is wanted for first-degree murder. He should be considered armed and dangerous. Deputies do not believe he has a way to travel far.
They also say anyone found to be helping Lockett may be charged with accessory after the fact, which
I don't even for real know what to feel. Hurt, broke, mad, anger. It's a lot.
Before we begin, thank you for choosing Cold Case Chronicles. Here we tell the stories that must be remembered with respect, truth, and the dignity every victim deserves. If you haven't already, please subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Now, let's step into tonight's story. A story of courage, love, and a woman who tried to break free, only to discover that freedom sometimes comes with a deadly price. The night was calm. The kind of October night where Ridgeway, Virginia settles into itself, leaves rattling across quiet roads, porch lights glowing softly, the hum of distant engines blending into the stillness. For most people, it was just another fall evening. But for one woman, it was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. A quiet breath of relief after months of fear, tension, and unanswered questions. A night where she finally allowed herself to believe she was stepping into safety. 39-year-old Rhonda Hairston-Lockett had spent the last months reclaiming her life, rediscovering pieces of herself that had been buried under years of control, emotional exhaustion, and unspoken fear. And yet, as she walked through the dim light of her final night, something felt off. Not a sound, not a silhouette, just a heaviness, a pressure in the air, the kind you can't explain but your body knows is real. People later described that night with words like tragic, shocking, senseless, but none of those captures the truth. The truth is that what happened to Rhonda wasn't sudden. It wasn't unpredictable. It was the result of a storm that had been building for years, quietly, privately, tightly contained behind closed doors, until the moment it finally exploded. To understand that explosion, you have to understand the woman at the heart of it. A woman who loved deeply. A woman who gave endlessly. A woman who tried, again and again, to bring peace into a home where peace simply couldn't survive. Rhonda was born April 3, 1986, in Martinsville, Virginia. A girl raised on faith, music, warmth, and the kind of laughter you could hear across a room before you ever saw her face. She grew into the kind of woman who made people feel comfortable, welcomed, and seen. She sang in her church choir not out of habit, but because she felt every note. She worked hard. She showed up. She carried herself with quiet strength. And if you asked anyone who knew her, from coworkers at Drake Extrusion Incorporated, to friends, to family, they would tell you the same thing. Rhonda loved her sons more than anything in the world. Omarte and Xavier were her joy, her purpose, her reason to keep fighting through every hardship life put in her path. But life has a way of testing even the strongest spirits. And for Rhonda, that test arrived in the form of a man she once believed would be her partner, her protector, her safe place. Joseph Chad Lockett, 40 years old, from Figsboro, Virginia, had a very different presence. Quiet, brooding, intense. The kind of man whose charm flickered unpredictably. Some days steady, other days volatile. A man who carried storms inside him and often expected the world to adjust to his weather. At first, their marriage looked like many others. A family trying to build stability, partnership filled with plans and hopes. But underneath it all were cracks, small ones at first. A raised voice that lingered too long. A silence that felt like punishment. A tension that made the walls feel thinner and the air feel heavier. Gradually, those cracks widened. Friends noticed. Rhonda carried stress differently during those years. Her smile remained, but her eyes seemed tired. Her presence faded in and out, like she was living in two worlds. The one she showed publicly, and the one she endured privately. Domestic violence rarely begins with physical violence. It begins with control, with isolation, with fear disguised as protectiveness, with apologies that come too quickly, and promises that never last. And at some point, Rhonda found the courage many never do. She left. She walked away from the chaos, from the fear, from the unpredictable storms. She separated from Joseph, creating distance between them. Distance meant safety or at least a chance at it. But leaving doesn't always end the danger. For many victims, it amplifies it. Those final months brought a noticeable shift in Rhonda's energy. She rediscovered herself. She focused on her boys. She worked. She sang. She lived. She breathed. She laughed again. But Joseph spiraled. His calls increased. His messages became more frequent. His appearances more uninvited. Every boundary she set, he tried to break. Every step forward she took, he tried to pull her back. By early October 2025, Rhonda had found temporary peace in Ridgeway, surrounded by family, familiarity, and the space to heal. But danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it waits quietly, just outside of view. People notice Joseph changing, his anger simmering beneath the surface. A man who couldn't accept no. A man who saw her independence as a personal attack. A man who interpreted her safety as his loss. Investigators later used the words escalating instability, the kind that emerges when obsession and entitlement collide. And on that final night, every storm he carried inside him rose to the surface. Rhonda didn't know. How could she? She was simply trying to live again, trying to breathe, trying to reclaim the joy that had been stolen in pieces over the years. But as she stepped into the final hours of her life, someone else was stepping toward her with a very different intention. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out. In the United States, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. The next morning in Ridgeway was deceptively calm. Sunlight filtered through the autumn leaves, painting golden patterns on the quiet streets, as if the world had yet to realize the tragedy that had already unfolded within one modest home on Garrett Road. Inside, the air carried a weight that no one outside could sense. 17-year-old Rhonda Hairston stirred early, instinctively checking on his mother, as he had done so many times before. But when he opened the bedroom door, the room was still. Too still. The sheets lay cold and untouched. And then, the horrifying realization. His mother, Rhonda, was motionless, her warmth gone, the light in her eyes extinguished by a single gunshot. In that moment, the world narrowed down to a point of disbelief, fear, and unbearable grief. Time seemed to fracture. Seconds stretched into eternities. Omarty's breath caught. He stumbled backward, a wordless cry barely escaping his lips. And then, amidst the paralyzing shock, he summoned the one act he could. He called for help. By 12:15 p.m., the Henry County Sheriff's Office had received the call. An anonymous plea, tinged with urgency and dread. The deputies arrived, trained for countless emergencies. Yet nothing could fully prepare them for the scene they were about to witness. A teenager, hollow-eyed and trembling, led them to the bedroom. And there, lying in the bed that should have been a place of comfort, was Rhonda Hairston-Lockett. The medical examiner would later confirm what was evident to all who saw her. The cause of death, a gunshot wound. The manner, homicide. The perpetrator, someone who had once claimed to love her. Even before the legal definitions and investigations began, the emotional toll was immediate. Family members, particularly her brother Casey Alcorn, struggled to comprehend the unthinkable. She was done and she was happy, Casey would later reflect, his voice carrying the tremors of heartbreak. And somebody who was jealous don't want to see you happy. Misery loves company. Those words, repeated and etched into memory, were both lament and warning. A reflection on the deadly consequences that often follow the act of leaving an abusive partner. Investigators moved swiftly, documenting every detail with methodical precision. Photographs captured the angle of the body, the blood spatter on the sheets, the trajectory of the bullet. Shell casings were collected, evidence preserved. Every fragment of the scene was treated as sacred, a piece of the story that would need to stand up in court. The focus wasn't only on justice, but also on understanding, on reconstructing the narrative of that final, fatal day. It was clear from the beginning that the homicide was personal, deliberate, and the prime suspect, Joseph Chad Lockett, was no stranger to the law. His history included violent offenses that should have prevented him from legally possessing a firearm. Yet here he was, the weapon in his hands ending a life that had been devoted to love, family, and faith. Virginia Code Section 18.2 to 308.2 prohibits any person with a violent felony conviction from possessing a firearm. For those convicted of serious crimes, the law mandates minimum sentences designed not just as punishment, but as preventative measures to protect potential victims. But laws, however stringent, only work when enforced, and the tragedy that befell Rhonda underscored the deadly gaps that exist when danger goes unchecked. The timeline leading up to her death was heartbreakingly clear. 7 days before Rhonda was found, she had ended her relationship with Lockett. 7 days of newfound freedom. 7 days where she could breathe again, laugh again, feel again. But freedom, in the eyes of an abuser, often becomes a threat, a provocation, a justification for violence. Experts in domestic violence call this the most perilous period, the moment after a victim asserts autonomy and challenges the illusion of control that has long defined the relationship. By Saturday evening, law enforcement had confirmed what family and friends already feared. Rhonda had been murdered. Homicide detectives combed through interviews, surveillance footage, and witness statements. They established a timeline, meticulously reconstructing the moments that led to her final encounter. And all roads pointed toward one person, Joseph Chad Lockett. As the investigation intensified, the manhunt for Lockett began. Despite limited resources and mobility, he remained at large, an armed fugitive moving through the shadows of familiar streets. The sheriff's office coordinated with regional agencies, distributing his photograph, alerting known associates, and scouring every potential hiding place. Every hour that passed weighed heavier on the community, on the family, and on the officers tasked with bringing him to justice. The standoff that would eventually end Lockett's flight played out like a tense narrative in itself. Tactical units established a perimeter around a residence in Martinsville, every neighbor watching with apprehension and curiosity. Inside, Lockett faced a choice: confrontation, escape, or surrender. For those watching from the outside, the seconds dragged unbearably, a silent question hanging in the air. Would this end with more blood, or would justice finally begin? And then, finally, a movement. The door opened, hands raised. Surrender. The manhunt ended as swiftly as it had begun, but the reverberations of his actions would echo for decades. Charges were filed that reflected the gravity of the crime. First-degree murder under Virginia Code Section February 18, 32 carried the possibility of life imprisonment, or, in the rarest of circumstances, capital punishment. Additional charges addressed the unlawful use of a firearm and possession by a convicted violent felon. Each statute explained not just the violation, but the rationale, society's recognition that certain acts demand accountability, that victims like Rhonda deserve justice beyond words. But the legal process is only part of the story. Equally crucial was understanding the evidence and its implications. Ballistics testing determined the weapon used, the trajectory of the shot, and the circumstances under which it was fired. Blood spatter analysis helped reconstruct the final moments, providing investigators with insight into her position, her response, and the level of premeditation. Autopsy reports confirmed cause and time of death, while forensic examination revealed no indication of struggle, suggesting the swiftness and deliberateness of the act. Beyond the technicalities, there was the human cost. Omerte and Xavian were left to navigate a grief that no child should ever endure, compounded by the traumatic discovery of their mother's lifeless body. Casey Alcorn, as the family spokesperson, conveyed a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "She was a beautiful, beautiful person," he told reporters, voice quivering. "She was on a mission, and her life got cut short by a miserable, soft coward." His words painted a portrait of loss that transcended the crime scene, reaching into every corner of a community shaken to its core. The community responded with a mixture of mourning and action. Donations helped cover funeral costs, support poured in from neighbors and colleagues, and the church where Rhonda had sung in the choir became a hub of collective grief. Conversations emerged around domestic violence awareness, the vulnerabilities of victims attempting to leave abusive relationships, and the systemic failures that allowed such tragedies to occur. Research shows that the period immediately following the decision to leave an abusive partner is the most dangerous. Statistically, women are at heightened risk of homicide during this critical window, particularly when the abuser has a history of violence and access to firearms. The stark reality is that leaving, while necessary for survival, can trigger a response that is calculated and fatal. Rhonda's murder was a harrowing illustration of that pattern, a reminder that control, jealousy, and obsession can escalate with deadly precision.
Rhonda Hairston was just 39, a mother to two boys, Marte and Zay. Her brother, Casey Alcorn, says she was driven, bubbly, and studying to become a nurse.
She was an awesome mother. She was a go-getter. She was on a mission, and she took care of her boys. She loved her boys. She would put her life on the line for her boys.
Police say it was one of those sons who found her shot and killed in her bedroom.
My nephew found her in the bed, checking on her, cold.
The Henry County Sheriff's Office says her estranged husband, Joseph Lockett, pulled the trigger. He was on the run for 2 days before surrendering to authorities at a home on Niblet Drive Monday. Just a week earlier, Alcorn says Rhonda made the decision to finally leave him for good.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful person, man. And she was just on a mission, man. Her life got cut short, man, by a miserable, soft coward.
Deputies have not released a motive, but her brother believes Lockett was not happy that she cut things off. Now he's trying to stay strong for his family.
I'm stuck right now, for real, just stuck and empty. But I'm gonna keep going, though, for her, for my nephews, for my mom and my little sister, as much as I can, man.
Lockett is being charged with first-degree murder, use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. He is set to be arraigned tomorrow morning in Henry County General District Court.
Her story, though tragic, also became a call to awareness. It forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about domestic violence, systemic gaps, and the urgent need for intervention. Friends and family reflected on the warning signs, the escalation, and the moments that might have prevented such a loss. Discussions about restraining orders, protective measures, and law enforcement protocols intensified. And in the midst of it all, her sons faced the ongoing task of survival, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. Every piece of evidence collected, every statute applied, every report filed, and every interview conducted ultimately served one purpose: to construct the narrative of what had occurred, to honor Rhonda's life through meticulous attention to detail, and to bring clarity to a community desperate for understanding. The crime was personal, deliberate, and preventable. And as investigators continued to piece together the timeline, the motives, and the psychology of the perpetrator, one fact remained unshakable: a woman had been silenced, and a family forever altered. Before we continue, remember that you can support those affected by domestic violence. Resources like the National Domestic Violence Hotline are available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. Safety and life are precious, and no one should navigate fear alone. The trial of Joseph Chad Lockett began under a veil of tension that gripped Ridgway like a heavy fog. Courtroom doors opened to a mix of reporters, family members, and residents, all eager for answers, yet fearful of what the proceedings might reveal. From the moment the first gavel struck, it was clear this was more than a legal battle. It was a confrontation with grief, justice, and the very human consequences of domestic violence. Prosecutors laid out the timeline with meticulous care, reconstructing each step of the crime. Using photographs, forensic reports, and eyewitness statements, they painted a chilling picture. A woman determined to reclaim her life, met by a man unwilling to relinquish control. Every slide projected on the courtroom screen seemed to echo with Rhonda's laughter, her warmth, and the promise of a future that had been stolen. The defense, predictably, tried to humanize Lockett, emphasizing his previous relationship with Rhonda and attempting to frame the tragedy as a momentary lapse in judgment. But the evidence was unyielding. Ballistics confirmed the trajectory of the gunshot. Fingerprint analysis placed Lockett at the scene. Surveillance footage and phone records corroborated the movements, the obsession, and the escalating behavior that culminated in her death. Even his history of violence and prior convictions became part of the narrative, illustrating a pattern of control and disregard for the law. Witness testimony carried weight beyond the factual. Friends recounted years of Rhonda's courage and generosity, of her steadfast dedication to her sons, of the quiet strength that had led her to finally leave a dangerous relationship. She had found her voice, one friend stated, voice trembling, and someone wanted to silence it forever. Law enforcement officers described the investigation with precision, detailing the manhunt, evidence collection, and tactical strategies used to ensure Lockett's apprehension without further bloodshed. The legal intricacies, as complex as they were, never overshadowed the human story. Virginia Code Section February 18, 32 defined first-degree murder as the willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing of another person, the exact circumstances under which Rhonda's life was taken. The prosecution emphasized the calculated nature of the act, highlighting that premeditation does not require hours of planning, but can be formed in moments, especially in the context of domestic violence, obsession, and possessiveness. Courtroom observers noticed subtle but profound details. The father of Rhonda's children, appearing pale and tense, restrained his emotions as the evidence unfolded. Her sons, now teenagers, listened from the gallery with a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. They were witnesses to the justice system in motion, learning lessons about law, morality, and the cruel reality that sometimes even the most loving person can become the target of lethal obsession. As the trial progressed, expert witnesses illuminated the psychological underpinnings of domestic abuse. They explained how control, jealousy, and perceived betrayal can drive a perpetrator to extreme measures. Leaving is the most dangerous moment for victims, a psychologist testified. The abuser perceives the loss of control as intolerable, often reacting with escalated violence to reassert dominance. These words, though clinical, carried an emotional weight that resonated throughout the courtroom. Evidence of prior threats, harassment, and intimidation further solidified the prosecution's case. Phone records revealed repeated messages, each more menacing than the last. Neighbors testified about observing erratic behavior and confrontations, small yet telling signs of the looming threat. In totality, the narrative constructed in the courtroom mirrored the experiences of countless victims whose warnings go unheard, whose pleas for help are too often dismissed. Outside the courthouse, the community held its breath. Vigils were organized, candlelight reflecting the collective sorrow. At the church where Rhonda had sung, congregants shared memories, her voice carrying hope, her smile infectious, her faith unwavering. These recollections, woven into the fabric of mourning, provided both solace and a stark reminder of what had been lost. After days of testimony, the jury began deliberations. In a small, quiet room, 12 individuals faced the weight of determining justice for a woman whose life had been violently cut short. Hours passed. The deliberations were intense, marked by discussion of legal definitions, evaluation of evidence, and the moral responsibility of delivering a verdict that would honor both the law and Rhonda's memory. Finally, the announcement came. Joseph Chad Lockett was found guilty of first-degree murder, unlawful use of a firearm, and possession by a convicted felon. The courtroom reacted with a mix of relief and lingering grief. For the family, the verdict was a moment of closure, though it could never fully erase the pain. The sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, reflected the gravity of the crime and the recognition that the loss of Rhonda's life was irreparable. Beyond the legal proceedings, the aftermath of Rhonda's death continued to resonate in Ridgway and beyond. Domestic violence awareness campaigns gained renewed attention, highlighting the dangers faced by individuals seeking to leave abusive relationships. Support networks expanded, hotlines became lifelines, and discussions about prevention and protection were reignited. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers were compelled to confront the harsh realities of femicide and the societal failures that allow it to persist. For Omarte and Xavian, the journey of grief transformed into one of resilience. They attended counseling, participated in support groups, and found solace in community outreach. Casey Alcorn, ever the steadfast sibling, became an advocate for domestic violence awareness, speaking publicly about the lessons learned from Rhonda's life and tragic death. The church choir, once a source of her personal joy, now sang in remembrance, each note a testament to her enduring spirit. The legal victory, while necessary, could never restore what was lost. Friends reflected on Rhonda's courage, the daily acts of love and devotion that defined her life. She had sought freedom, dignity, and peace, aspirations so simple, yet so profoundly human. Her death was a stark reminder of the stakes involved when abuse escalates unchecked, when society's protective measures fall short, and when the price of autonomy becomes a target for violence. The case of Rhonda Hairston-Lockett also serves as a cautionary tale, a narrative that blends individual tragedy with systemic lessons. The meticulous attention of law enforcement, the dedication of prosecutors, and the resilience of the family highlight the multifaceted nature of justice. But it also underscores that no verdict, no sentence, and no public mourning can fully substitute for a life abruptly ended. As Ridgway slowly returned to the rhythms of everyday life, the echoes of her story remained. Conversations about safety, support, and empowerment continued, driven by the desire to prevent similar tragedies. Her sons, her family, and her community carried her memory forward, not as a tale of defeat, but as a clarion call to vigilance, empathy, and action. And while her voice may have been silenced in life, it continues to resonate in memory, in advocacy, and in the ongoing struggle to end domestic violence. Her laughter, her faith, her love for her family, and her courage in leaving an abusive relationship. These are the legacies that endure, a testament to the woman she was and the life she lived, however brief. Before we close, remember that support is available for those in danger. The National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at 1-800-799-7233. Help is confidential, immediate, and life-saving. Thank you for joining us in remembering Rhonda Hairston-Lockett. If you value true crime stories told with depth, care, and dedication, subscribe to Cold Case Chronicles. True crime, where we honor victims, examine justice, and explore the stories that demand to be told. Her story will not be forgotten.